Welcome to another episode of Dwayne Spin Stop. This is the last episode for the season, and I've saved it for, in some ways, the best for the last. Not to say that my previous guests weren't, but this is more meaningful to me because Margaret Thomas here is a family relation, and we'll explain just a little bit about how that's the case. But first, a little introduction to Margaret. She is not only my aunt, she's also the current president of Aware, and she is an editor. There's a lot of books that are out, and we'll talk about her new release. This is Awesome Women of Singapore. We'll talk a little bit more about that, so we'll get into that. And also a very special book that my great-grandfather left behind, by Francis Thomas, and this is Memoirs of a Migrant. We'll get more into learning about him and the history and all things good like that. But first, could I ask you, and for you to get to know Margaret a little bit more, to think of a question to the universe. It can be an open-ended question. It doesn't have to be a yes or no.
Yes, that's a very important question that a lot of people in Singapore are wondering about right now.
Okay.
When are we going to be able to travel again, given COVID?
Very, very good question. So, before we get into that, I'm going to have you have a look at this. And before you decide which deck you want to use, I'm going to plug really quickly. Thank you once again to the wonderful people at Yishu for sponsoring these clothes that are inspired by ancient Chinese costumes, but with the 21st century touch. You can't actually see all of it, but this particular shirt I have on has, there you can see some of the embroidery there now. It's very subtle sometimes, and the buttons very. I'm not doing this justice. I will try and put a picture on Instagram. In any case, also if you'd like to review something we've talked about, I put timestamps in the video description below. You can also follow the Facebook page for relevant articles, or the playlists on YouTube. There are a lot of things happening there to do with stage in Singapore. In any case,
Power animals.
Animals, good choice. All right, when can we travel again?
Yeah.
Okay. Safely. Okay. Let's see what the cards have to say. So at any moment you feel ready, you can ask me to stop.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so you want to take the top card or you want me to spread?
I don't know. Top card's fine.
Top card's fine. Okay, you can show. Ooh, Black Panther. What is the quality that we're looking at here?
Follow your passion.
Follow your passion. Maybe it's telling you.
Black Panther passion.
Maybe it's telling you to travel when you think it's safe. Well, let's see what it has to say and see what you make sense of. Okay, it says the winding road of your life with all its twists and turns, expected and unexpected, has brought you to this point. You're faring quite well, yet there's an urgent need that you're feeling in your bones and your soul. The need to express more and more fluently your true self, your inner core. Maybe that's traveling, I don't know. It's so much safer and in some ways easier to deny yourself the fruits of following your true passion. Questions of safety and survival abound by stepping into this total expression of who you truly are. Let them remain as questions, cast them aside and embrace what turns you on. Once you've discovered what your true passion is, you probably already know what it is. By honoring it and living it, all else will be taken care of. Does that surprise you, challenge you? Trust that your inner yearning is real and express it. If not all at once, then gradually, but express it. Don't worry about how it will look to others or whether or not anyone would approve. When it comes to the end of your days, you will be able to say with all sincerity and without reservation that you lived your life passionately and in truth. Additional associations: sensuality, strength, clarity, solitude. Does this make any sense to you at all, or does it apply?
Doesn't answer the question of travel, but it does say something about where I am maybe now, as I anticipate turning 70 at the end of the year. But also, given all the things I'm doing, most of it voluntary. A lot of it, some of it has to do with concepts, writing, editing, that kind of stuff. But I'm beginning to feel stirring a need to go back to writing. So perhaps that is answering. That's a comment on that, as opposed to the literal question that I put to you.
Well, in a very sort of indirect way, I see it as, with regard to your direct question, I see it as, maybe it may not ever be completely safe, and it's just telling you to follow your passion. If your writing is going to take you somewhere, then travel there to do the research or the exploration that you need to do.
Yeah, the travel is just the Singaporean need to get away, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that's a irrelevant issue actually.
Right.
You can do all the travel you want in your mind with the internet.
Right. And you don't feel you do necessarily need to travel to write, right? Do you need to get away into a different space?
I don't think so. I think if I were to go away to travel, I'd end up getting distracted by where I am.
Oh, right.
So I think it doesn't matter where you are, it's the discipline of your mind.
Right.
Which is a challenge.
It can be, yes. So now let's talk about the book. I just wanted to highlight, first of all, some really interesting women that were here. Janet Lim was sold for silver.
Yeah, she wrote a book called Sold for Silver.
Oh, right. And was she also sold for silver?
She was sold because she was
captured by the Japanese, right?
Well, earlier, but as a child, she was sold as a bond maid, basically a servant girl,
right?
Because her parents needed the money, and she was sold for silver, literally, for money, But she managed to make good. I mean, she was in China, Hong Kong, came to Singapore. But around the time when laws were changing and they were beginning to protect young women, children, from this kind of a fate, so she was adopted by a family and got an education, became a nurse.
Right.
I think was the first local nurse to go to England for advanced nursing training.
Wow.
Became the first local matron of the St Andrews Mission Hospital.
Amazing. I
and
feel like
wrote the book.
And then she wrote the book, which now I think you've opened me up to wanting to read more books, because there are some mentions of other books in here.
Yeah.
And I also feel like I could probably pull out any woman from here and you'd be able to give a great audio commentary. I don't even know how you remember so much.
Because I had to research and edit the profiles of them,
Right.
No, but the book, it's great that a lot of people, when they see this, they say awesome women in Singapore. I never knew that there were so many awesome women in Singapore. And that's Claire Chiang, that's the Everest. No, that's the woman who went to the North Pole.
Right, I'm just looking it through so you get an idea of the...
Halima. That was an incredible story, that lady.
Halima, by the way, shook your hand at the Istana, right? Congratulations on that.
She agreed to have the... I wasn't inducted, we were inducting...
Right, yes, seven, right?
7 women,
and 6 of them who are no longer with us.
Yeah, 2 of them unfortunately died last year.
Oh, okay.
Recently, the youngest ones.
So it's meant to be also read very easily by children.
It's meant to be a children's book, but actually I find a lot of adults find it a perfectly acceptable book to have.
I think, I would say anyone can be interested in this, because it's just basically knowing these women and
Well, this all the 160 women in the Hall of Fame, not including the 7 who were just inducted, they're all in the book. 100 of them are featured prominently in the sense they have this page, short profile. The main profile is on the website swhf.sg. And the other 50 odd who are not featured prominently are still in the book, the shorter profiles.
Yeah, right at the end, right?
But the remarkable thing about this one, exactly. So they're all there, and all of them have remarkable stories. It's just that we couldn't feature everyone prominently, would make it much too fat as a book.
Right.
But the other thing about the book really is the fact that we commissioned, Epigram, the publisher, commissioned 10 local women artists, illustrators, randomly assigned each of them 10 of the portraits of the 100 women, and so you got this great variety of styles, right?
Yeah.
Some are like cartoonish anime, others are more realistic, and so on.
And what's great is that this book was made entirely, if I dare say, by women, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
Any plans for an audiobook also read
We
by?
are looking at various things. We're looking for partners because along with this book, and we is the Singapore Council of Women's Organizations. Though I'm president of AWARE, I'm also on the board of the SCWO,
Yeah.
which launched the Hall of Fame in 2014. But along with the launch of this book, we have launched something called Project Awesome,
Okay.
Dare to Dream, and we've been fundraising for this, quite good support. Project Awesome will see us delivering probably next week to every school in Singapore, every primary and secondary school, every children's home like Boys Town and places like that,
Wonderful.
every madrasa. There are 330 or so schools, institutions. We're going to give them 4 copies of the book, the hardcover book.
Oh, there's a hardcover. I didn't know.
Yes, it's a limited edition. The
Okay.
one in the shops is soft as paperback. It's a
Right.
hardcover edition. Along with the books, we are going to offer the schools lesson plans.
Oh, great.
It's been put
Great.
together, so it's catered for different age groups, upper primary and lower secondary initially.
Okay.
So you can choose, but you have to register so that we can engage with you and get feedback. Okay.
Right.
So these are lesson plans to help teachers use the stories in classes, particularly for the citizenship and character education program.
Okay.
And it's really to teach kids about important core values,
Right.
compassion, courage, integrity, and so on,
Yeah.
which of course these women exhibit in one way or another.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, Project Awesome. So we've got lesson plans that they can use, exhibitions and talks, which we've always done, but we're doing it in a more thematic way. Also a workshop, one initially, possibly more, which is kind of interactive. It's sort of self-actualization, or so it could be called maybe like Be Awesome, Chart Your Own Path. Using the stories of the women in the Hall of Fame, children would be presented, pen and paper or digital, presented with a choice. Let's say, and this is just my out of the blue idea, right? We've got professionals doing it. A situation, let's say you're walking along the street, you see someone begging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what do you do? Do you cross the street and avoid the person?
Right.
Do you take out some money and put it in the bowl?
Mm.
Or do you stop and talk to the person to say, why are you begging?
Right.
Okay? And so you make a choice, and then you take the path, and it will be illustrated with stories from the book.
Oh, wow.
Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's the basic idea of it.
Right, and then I guess you also want to explore like why they're
Why
making these
the
decisions. and
implications. So if you,
implications.
yeah, it could be other things like, if you have to choose between the humanities and the science, where it could lead to.
Right.
So the whole idea of Project Awesome is really to use the stories of the women, the awesome women of Singapore, to inspire kids to dare to dream, to dream big, to aim high, to basically go out and be whatever you want.
Yeah.
Don't hold back. Because many of these women had major obstacles, like Janet Lim, that they managed to overcome.
Yeah.
They had some passion, some ambition, some dream,
Yeah.
and they went for it.
Yes.
And so the whole idea is to tell young Singaporeans, right, especially girls, right, look, whatever it is you want to do, whether it's big or small, just go for it.
Yeah.
And right now we've got this big thing about gender equality going on in Singapore, the
Mhm.
conversations and so on, and we think this can help in that effort because we get this to school children. For girls, it is to say, look, you can do these things, women before you have done it, and in much more difficult times.
Exactly.
And to boys, and you correct me if I'm wrong, right? It is to tell young boys, look, women are not just your mothers and grandmothers and sisters and maids,
Yeah.
They have done great things in Singapore,
Yeah.
which have not always been fully recognized in our official history books.
Yeah. They have pushed boundaries too, and they have been firsts of doing different things, and no, I mean, I was, as an adult male, I've been inspired by this, and also enlightened by it.
Yeah.
There's one lady, I forget her name now. There's just so many. She's a foster mother for 20.
Indrani, yeah.
Indrani,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Another one founded almost like she supported local artists back in the day. She signed them on to Sakura Teng, and she supported these
Daisy Devon.
Daisy Devon. That's
she was
right.
the A&R manager for EMI, and she was headhunted in the 1950s as a woman
Right.
to run their business in Singapore.
Right.
You know?
So yeah, women are responsible for so many things.
Much more than you realize. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, you can find out more in this book. There's even Moselle Nizim.
Yeah.
Father was a famous scientist, and even through that, I discovered that Albert Einstein
came to
Singapore in
to raise money for the Jewish
1922.
cause. Yeah.
Very interesting history. So as we talked about earlier on, this is merely scratching the surface. If you want to know more, of course, you can research. The information is available on the internet, but here's a really good place to start to understand and
get a spread of it, because the Hall of Fame has women from adventurers and explorers to sports, uniform groups, law, health, history, government, and so on. So it's a whole spectrum of activity.
Wonderful. I'm so glad you put this together.
Yeah, so that's what most people are saying. They're well-accomplished people are looking at it and saying, "My God, I never realized that women had done all these things."
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Wonderful. Congratulations on the release of the
Thank you.
book.
Yeah, I'm glad you like it.
And I'm looking forward to you writing some more. There is something I guess we can talk about. I was going to save this for the end of it, but you do have okay, maybe we'll talk about it then, after we talk about this book at the end. But another sort of project you're working on, which is sort of like I would say, I guess it complements this book in a sense, right? So if I've read, okay, we'll save all that. I have so many questions, but I'm jumping the gun here. So back onto writing a little bit, publishing wise, just really briefly, if someone were interested in publishing, is there any advice you can give? I guess, like, do they publish locally? Do you need an agent here? And what's
I think it depends on where you are in your writing journey, right?
Right.
If it's not, we don't really have agents here, I think,
Yeah, it doesn't seem.
And they are there internationally. If you want to get internationally, you have to do it. But and some local meaning Singapore, Malaysia, have made it big, hit the big time, right? But I think if you want to write anything, the main thing is just write it first.
Yeah.
Write it first, right? And bounce it off local publishers, and you can send it to international ones if you think it's good enough. Most people get rejected.
Yeah.
Right? Just write it. And what is encouraging in Singapore is that local publishers are coming up with a lot of stuff now.
There's so much.
There's a huge amount of literature, poetry.
Yeah, there's even all kinds of genres, even comics now, and it's so alive.
Yeah, exactly. The pity is that Singapore market is pretty small. If you sell a few thousand, 5,000 is like a bestseller.
Yeah.
But what to do,
Yeah.
There are some people have been able to get international publishers, but it's still very small, sprinkling, right?
Right.
Bali Kaur Jaspal, wasn't her book picked up? One of her books picked up by Reese Witherspoon for her book club.
Oh yeah, I think I heard something like that.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
So it's beginning, it's happening, but that can only happen when there's a greater mass of books in Singapore. The more we produce, and Epigram is good because they sponsor the annual award, right, for
That's right.
local books. And
Yeah.
still looking for the great Singapore novel.
Yeah.
So let's keep doing it. If you want to write, just write whatever it is.
I think now's a good time because there is a curiosity and a hunger and and also the representation that people are looking for on the like all. There's this new series called Kung Fu now on CW. Ta Keng Hua is in it. I'll try to get her on the show at some point. And at Crazy Rich Asians, we all know this, but you see a lot more representation now and a hunger for so like previously in the US, if I was Asian, I would still have to sort of, I would believe, I would have to code switch into an American accent, but now they want an authentic, even a Singaporean accent would be something they would welcome, right? So then the ones who can't do a proper Singaporean accent now are like on the losing end in a sense.
Exactly. So the message to local DJs is stop speaking American if you don't have a real American accent.
Right, exactly.
Develop your authentic Singaporean accent, you know.
Good advice. So let's try through a little bit through your journey, your career. Writing, has it always been your first love? No?
No.
But you started out with the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and then you went into Business Times. And your father was a writer as well.
Well,
So
he was a teacher, but he wrote a lot,
Right.
you know, and he did attempt to write novels. You see, you've got Gull Against the Wind.
yeah,
which
so I've
couldn't-
got 3 here that
couldn't
he's
find a
written.
publisher,
This is probably not in the library. I know I
No.
can find this in the library.
Yeah, this
but
was privately published by his sister when my father was dying, basically.
right.
He wrote it, and he did send it to various people, but it wasn't really. It needed a lot of editing, which he
Right.
didn't have time to do.
Mhm.
And local publishers did have a look at it, but it's a little bit too rooted in its time, I think. You know.
Right.
He explores various issues. Earlier in life, he did write poetry and some other novels, which I'm only just discovering, you know. But mostly
Right.
he wrote serious speeches and those kinds of things, articles, you know.
That's more in here, right?
This was what he was working on after he retired from being a principal,
Mhm.
because he was unusually for an Englishman, because when he came here he was still part of the British Empire, and so he was, you know, part of the ruling elite.
Right.
But he got involved in local politics in the 1950s.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess we'll get into that more when
Okay,
we
yeah.
come to a section. Yeah. So back to you, I guess.
Yeah.
So your love. So writing.
No, I
you
never-
wouldn't say is your first love.
No, I've never really had a strong. If anything, when I was doing postgraduate work in England in the mid 70s, right, and some essay I done with talked to my tutor, she liked it or something, and my comment was, "But it's so journalistic." Not that I was anticipating an academic career, but you know,
Right.
it said something about. But what I didn't realize then really was that my writing style is basically journalistic.
Right.
You know.
Right.
But I never had a strong desire to go into journalism.
Okay.
When I came back from postgraduate work, I did talk to Peter Lim, who was the editor-in-chief at Straits Times. They were about to launch the Business Times as a separate paper.
Mhm.
This is 1976.
Right.
And I did kind of go, you know, they were looking for people, and he said he thought I would be, should join, and I was doubtful. I went for the test. I basically screwed up the test. I told them at the interview and all that, look, I know nothing about business because I'd only done economics as a minor, and I'd done sociology, philosophy,
Right.
and I have no major interest in business. And they say, you don't need an interest in business. Fine. Okay.
Mm.
Then when we came to do the test with other people, as the language test and all that, and then it comes to the end, there's like a composition that you have to do, like school composition.
Okay.
The 3 topics I had to choose from were all business related, and I was young, arrogant, and I looked at this and I said, I can't do this, and I wrote there something to the effect of, I told you I don't know business, and I left.
Right.
I was needing a job, but how arrogant can you get? I left, okay? Predictably, they wrote to me a week later to say, well, thank you, wish you all the best in your future endeavors, right?
Mm.
Some months later, I end up as an investment analyst in the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is perhaps the... Okay, anyway.
Okay. But in
Yeah,
some ways,
okay.
a blessing in disguise.
Well,
maybe.
yes, you know. So I spent 2 years, and this was in the international department, which was basically managing Singapore's reserves
Right.
before GIC in Temasek came up. And I had to go at doing what was needed, but I think by the end of the 2-year probation period, it was apparent to me that this is not something I'm going to be good at.
Right.
And it was even more apparent to my bosses.
Right.
I think they would have moved me into what would have become like corporate comms department,
Mm-hmm.
but that's when Business Times had been around for 2 years. My friend who was there called me and said, look, come and talk to there was a new editor. So I went down to talk to the editor, Scotsman,
Mm-hmm.
and again it was more me saying, why do you think I can write?
Right. Was there a finance? What do you call them? Beats, right? Were there? Was there a
yeah.
section?
They were just recruiting.
Right.
Business Times covered everything, you know. Again, I had to go through the test. Again, there was this composition. again, I didn't do as told.
But you wrote more.
2 years older, instead of one line that basically says F off, I wrote 2 paragraphs, which was, look, what's the point of this test? You know, if you want to test my writing, my ability to write something off the cuff, it could be any topic, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to test my ability to do a good analytical piece about business, then give me prior warning or give me access to this. And I took one of the topics and said, if I ever write about this, I need interest, whatever, you know?
Right.
So it was a considered thing, and I walked away and I said, okay, I'm just not cut out to be a journalist because I basically showed my finger to them
Right.
2 times, right? But this editor, the Scotsman, I think he saw in this attitude something that is probably useful in journalism, which is the readiness to challenge, to question, right? And so I was hired. And then I
Wow.
realized that, okay, so maybe this is what I was meant to do.
And you were there for
Yeah, I was in
Okay.
Business Times for a couple of years. Singapore Monitor came up. I left, not for
Right.
money, for the excitement of challenging, you know. Newspapers then got merged. Singapore Press Holdings came back. I ended up back in BT.
right.
Then through the 90s, got into where the internet came. I was very taken up by it. And this is a small, unimportant fact, but in June 1995, the Business Times of Singapore went online, and it was the first English language daily newspaper in Asia to go
Wow.
online.
Wow.
We beat the Star in Malaysia by a week,
Wow.
you know. And that's something I can take credit for because I got excited by it and we got it going, right?
Very nice.
So
yeah,
that-
but Margaret also hasn't mentioned that from her attitude towards joining the Business Times, she eventually became deputy editor.
Oh yeah, so when I came out to BT, yeah, I ended up becoming like a deputy editor, you know.
That's crazy. It just goes to show how you know sometimes you don't have to follow conventions, but just follow your heart. I mean.
Yeah, you know, I probably wasn't the best fit in Business Times, but then we did cover politics and social issues, marketing and those kinds of things, you know.
Right.
And actually the editors of the Business Times, physics grad, English grad, you know, it doesn't really matter what you study, it's how you approach something.
Right. And congrats! I mean, to get it online and you know.
Well, yeah, that was quite fun, you know. Yeah, those
Yeah.
days. Yeah, and then of course so the internet then became very absorbing, and a few years later, by about 1999, 2000, I moved over from SPH proper to Asia One, the internet arm, and we tried, you know, we listed and all that, but we're a little bit behind the curve, and 2 years later we downsized, and that's when I left SPH, and
Right.
yeah.
And then how did you find your way towards working for Aware? Or had you
Oh, no.
always been juggling that?
No, I don't work for
I mean-
Aware. I'm a volunteer with Aware.
Right,
Aware
right.
was a separate track, actually. Separate track because I was a journalist in the Singapore Monitor. I'd been writing columns because in Business Times, in fact, what I started doing almost immediately was writing editorials. You know, and which is very good training for writing columns. Yeah. And when I moved over the Singapore Monitor, apart from various things I did, I was also writing columns, which some I suppose were feminist in tone, right? To me, feminism is simply justice, you know, right? And the older people would remember that in 1983, Lee Kuan Yew, at his National Day rally speech, made this very controversial speech, remarks about the fact that graduate women were not getting married. It sparked the whole great marriage debate and the graduate mother scheme. He basically pulled out stats to show that over the years that as women got more educated, graduate women, they were not marrying or marrying later and having fewer kids or not having kids at all.
Right.
Now, LKY, for all the great things that he did, was a eugenicist in the sense that he believed, or for at least a part of his life, had believed that you are born as opposed to develop your abilities.
Right.
You know, the nature-nurture
right.
argument. So his concern when he looked at the declining birth rates and the fact that graduate women, educated women, therefore presumably intelligent, well, that's a questionable assumption, that graduate women not getting married, and so they were not passing on, they were not begetting smart kids. Okay, so the talent pool would shrink if educated people were not producing more kids of that, right?
Right.
Questionable assumption, you know.
Yeah.
And it annoyed a lot of people. Anyway, so in mid 80s, 83 onwards, this sparked a whole slew of policies that were to incentivize graduate women to have kids. So the graduate priority admission scheme, if you're a graduate, you can jump the queue and that kind of stuff, and all kinds of tax incentives. And they, on the other side, had some disincentives, so that if you were not well educated, if you were not bright enough to go to O levels or do well, then please have two if you must, but don't have more.
Right.
You know, and
this was part of the stop at 2, like
stop at 2 was earlier.
That
was earlier because
now the population is aging, so they want more.
50s and 60s, you know, we were producing the birth rate was like the average woman was having 4, 5, 6 kids.
Right.
Right, and there was no population control, and so population control was actually a voluntary effort initially. Then the government got involved in the 60s, right? And so family planning came up, family planning clinics, contraception became available, abortions in early 70s became freely available. And because we really had a population issue, and there were not enough jobs, schools, housing and all that.
Right.
That's when we had the stop at 2 and lovely ads, you know, girl or boy, 2 is enough.
Yeah.
And they would have 2 is enough and 2 girls. And this had an effect. This was social engineering at its best in Singapore. Over a generation or two, it got to the point where now most Singapore parents, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's a boy or girl. You have your 1 or 2 children and you're happy with it. In fact, since the 80s, they've been trying to say have 3 or more if you can afford it. If you can afford it, right?
I remember that.
That's the thing, that's going on.
Right.
So anyway, that was when his concern really was that if the bright people of Singapore don't keep producing babies, the talent pool would shrink. So they came up with all kinds of schemes to encourage graduate women to have babies, and the less educated people to stop at 2, continue stopping at 2, right?
It's a little bit discriminatory.
More than a little bit. It's just sexist, elitist, and eugenicist, right?
Yeah.
And there were things like the Social Development Unit, which is government-sponsored matchmaking, which I don't have any issues for, you know. I mean, it's like Tinder, what they call it?
Tinder, yeah.
Or whatever, okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, but the objection was SDU was only for graduates. And the highly subsidized outings and parties, right? And I don't think it was in black and white, but the understanding was that if you're male, whatever, single male, any age, it's okay. But women over 35, a little bit past the marrying age, you know. So anyway, a lot of people were not happy about these very sexist statements that were coming out, because along the way there were statements like the education minister or Minister of State for Education went to, I think, St. Nicholas Girls' School's 50th anniversary, girls' school, right, and looked around and said, you know, girls should be girls. Why do you have uniform groups and all that? Girls' school should be training girls to be good mothers, teach home economics and that kind of stuff. And so we did have policies that, you know, switched this way.
Right.
Not related directly to this, but symptomatic of the patriarchal attitudes. In 1979, the government started a policy where every intake of students for medical school, there was a quota, no more than 1/3 could be women. 1/3 quota. Every fresh intake into medical school, only 1/3. So a lot of women who wanted to become doctors couldn't get in and ended up going abroad to study and living abroad, you know.
Right.
Their argument was it's expensive, medical training is expensive, and then after that women will stop being a doctor because they get married, they have children, or they won't go into specialist courses, or because they've got to look after family, they can't do night shift, and you know, all these kinds of arguments. So there's a slew of these overtly discriminatory policies and schemes. There are various others, right, in the Constitution too. So where it came about, because about a year after that controversial speech, which spawned a whole bunch of policies,
right.
Two women organized a seminar, forum at the NUS Society, Gilhouse, Graduates House, called Women's Choices, Women's Lives. And they got 5 women to speak, and not the usual people, and one of them was me. And so the 5 of us said whatever we had to say. But after that, and it was really about, in one way or another, we were protesting about these policies, right?
Right.
But at the end of it, over tea, there was this lingering sense that, okay, so what? So we've come out and spoken about it, then what? You know, do we go back and continue to grumble in our little homes? So we decided, no, let's keep talking. So we arranged to meet again, and this led to regular meetings when we decided, okay, look, we are the educated elite, women, professionals, journalists, businesswomen, and so on. We're not happy about the situation.
Right.
But if we don't do something about it, then who is going to?
Yeah.
Who's going to say? And so we said that we want to be able to not just speak up and protest about things that we're not happy with. We want to do it on the strength of research, you know, and we want to say why this policy is wrong and what are the policies you should have. Advocacy, in other words. You know? So we looked around at the existing women's groups, and there were quite a few, but they're mostly either, you know, self-interest, professional, secretarial associations, or they're more charity, networking kind of stuff. You know, there's no group, not just with women's issues, but generally, not that many organizations, civil society organizations, that were doing advocacy, meaning marshalling your arguments against policies or for policies and finding a way to put them out there for discussion. So that's when we decided we would form our own organization, and Association Women for Action and Research.
Right.
You know?
Fantastic.
So that was 36 years now.
Wow. But although you say you don't work for Aware, I mean, but now the team, I mean, forgive me for being a layman, but they are employed.
Oh yeah. Well, initially we were just volunteers. After a few years, we got premises. Claire Chiang's old home in Racecourse, she was a president for a time, became available, so we had our own center, and Claire actually started the helpline, you know, together with newspaper at first, then we launched it. So we began to have some staff, admin staff, helpline, counselor, that kind of stuff. And so for until about until 2009, when the Aware Saga happened.
And by the way, you can now. This is an official podcast by Aware. There's a 12 episode on the 12 episodes on the entire
long form podcast called Saga, you know, on iTunes, Spotify everywhere.
Good music streaming platform, which you can listen into in case you want to find out more about what happened in more detail. And I think it's actually written very, very well. It's presented very, very professionally, and I've heard this from other female friends of mine.
Oh, it's quite engrossing.
Yeah.
People who listen to it say they binge listen, you know,
right?
Because every episode ends with a bit of a cliffhanger. It's in a very dramatized way with good background music. Yeah.
Right. Did you even find some surprising things? I mean, because you probably are so for the lack of a better word, aware of what was going on then, but then like to listen to it, reinterpret it.
I think we were all interviewed. The team interviewed 50 people or so, people who were in the middle of it, as well as commentators, observers, and so on. And we tried to get to the other side, but without much success, you know.
Right.
No, but it's a very important part of civil society history in Singapore, and people who live through it welcome being reminded, and reliving it. But most importantly, I think a lot of young people who are, 10 years old at that time and not aware of this, listen and have learned a lot,
Yeah, for sure. Can you give us a quick summary for those of you, say maybe 10-year-olds right now who are watching this and wondering what the Aware Saga is all about? In a nutshell, I don't know if I'm going to do it justice, but maybe I'll try. Like basically, it was there was a insurgence of a different faith-based group that was trying to change over the management of Aware, right?
Well, they objected to some of the things we were doing, largely because they had a very inaccurate, incorrect idea of what we were doing, and they felt this clashed with their values, which they felt were dangerous for Singapore, and they decided, if you object to what somebody is doing, whether it's the government or a group, you raise it, right? You tell them, you write a letter to Straits Times, you write to the government, you write to police, or you write to the people to say, this is wrong, right?
Yep.
They didn't do that. They started looking at what we were doing and got completely wrong idea because they had bits of information taken out of context. And then they decided, or rather the one who masterminded it, decided to infiltrate and sent around letters that kind of worked people into a bit of a frenzy about what we were supposed to be doing.
Right.
And encourage people to join. Aware then and now you could join online, become a member. And then at the AGM in March 2009, and with NGOs normally you have AGMs every year or two, and usually you go around to make sure you've got a slate because volunteers, it's quite hard to get people to stand for election. Right. So normally you have a slate already, and so we had that as usual. Waited for quorum, just about made it. But then this time there was no need to wait for quorum because suddenly there was like 100 people. I wasn't there, but it's astonishing.
Yeah.
And then when it came to elections, the president got elected, then every other position, the nominated person from the slate, suddenly there was a challenger from this strange, unknown lot.
Really almost out of character in a sense.
It was very different, and it was by the book. They could do what they did because our constitution was very open, very trusting. And so of the 12-member executive committee, 9 were taken by these newcomers, some of whom had joined just months ago, or most of whom had only joined within the months or a year or so. Anyway, it was obviously some kind of a plot. At that point, we had no idea, but we had some sense from Googling and finding that some of them there during the 2007 debate in Parliament about 377A.
Right.
Some of those names, they had written homophobic letters to the Straits Times media. Right. So we began to suspect something was up. And anyway, over the next 5 weeks, it began to play out, and after a week or so, the media began to pay attention because Straits Times wrote the story first to say, Aware, I can't remember the title, but basically Aware taken over by strangers.
Okay.
And then everybody began to cover it, and the pattern became to come out that they were a faith-based group. They were, let's call them conservative, radical extremists, with rather extremely conservative views, who had somehow or another come to the conclusion that Aware had a gay agenda, which, it's preposterous,
Yeah.
It's taking things out of context, right?
For sure, yeah.
But anyway, the media called it the Aware Saga because every day there was something happening. They called us the old guard, we regrouped, and people all came back, people who had been Aware members, former members, but drifted off, came back and just, came together. And so we called for an EGM, we went around to get signatures, and what was amazing was the way the people came together, old members as well as new volunteers, friends, and without real planning, we became like two groups. One group that focused on the advocacy part, the strategy and those kinds of things, and another group, very large group, we called it mobilization, I think, and they did things like the EGM was going to be held on May 2nd, and in the end at Suntec because membership kept growing. Both sides were telling people join, or people wanting to join as they heard what was going on.
Right.
And the initial venues for the EGM became too small, so they moved from one place to another, ended up in Suntec. And on that day, there were 2,000-3,000 people in that hall. There were groups, our mobilization team, there are teams of people who had brought flowers to give out to people. Others were getting drinks and snacks. Seat warmers who registered early and went to the hall to chope seats for our strategy teams, our advocacy teams,
Wow.
There were counseling, there were people to calm people down, and medical teams, it was amazing. And it was quite a major event. There are people who attended who said, one young teacher, she was then a JC teacher, told us after the Saga that she wished she'd been able to bring some of her students with her, because for her, she felt it was possibly one of the most important things she'd done as a young adult Singaporean, which is to come to the Saga and to vote, come to the EGM and to vote for us. So we won it back. We won it back on a clear 2/3 majority, because we looked at it, and while they had taken it over fairly by the Constitution, there were some who felt maybe they'll be good, give them a chance, but we felt no, there are too many questions about why, their motivations. Plus, there was still a need for Aware's work, and that body of work, we can't just let people trample on it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's still a lot of work to be done. So once we won it back, we said, all right, what's the best way to ensure that, not just that this doesn't happen anymore, that one you can deal with changing the constitution and all that, but there's clearly work for Singapore, for Aware to do to establish gender equality in Singapore. What's the best way to do it? You can't do it by continuing to depend on volunteers, because people have their lives to get on with. You get burnt out, you get run out.
Right.
So that's when in 2010 we began the professionalization part. We tried it earlier, but wrong time, perhaps couldn't get the right people.
Right.
But this time it worked. It took us a few years to sort out some kinks, but now we have 30. It's just about 30 people on the staff. Full-time equivalents, and 20 or 30 others who are paid in small ways to do bits of the work.
Wonderful. That's great.
Yeah.
Hearing this story and what you've done so far, it feels like almost you're following in some ways a parallel. Your father's footsteps, and getting involved, making change, being an advocate for equality. Those are also things that were mentioned in this book here that I've read as well, and it's part of educating people, right? And he was a teacher primarily. The funny thing I want to say here is that there is a road named after Francis Thomas. I think
school,
in a school, in the school, St Andrew School, and I think neither of us can say that it's our grandfather's road. Unfortunately, my mom can say that's my grandfather's road. But in any case, back to him, I've always wondered reading this book what he would have thought of the things that you did, or maybe even that I've done as a teacher. And as I was thinking that, I think you recently shared with me that there's something you're working on, which is letters to my
I've done a piece
father.
For a collection that is being published by Marshall Cavendish called Letter to My Father.
Letter to my father.
Letter to My Father. Well, they got a bunch of people, 30 I think people, to write this letter to my father, and they asked me, so I wrote it. And basically the title that I've given it is I Wonder What You Would Say. So it's a piece I've written basically, and it's accurate, because there are times when I look at Singapore, and I do wonder if you had lived to today, what would you say about where we are now? You know, from the density of the population to the social policies or political developments, you know, even the economic things. And I think to a large extent he would welcome much of it because he was, you know, he believed, he saw the value of technology and progress and so on. But his concern always was much more with the individual, you know, and he wanted very much to see Singapore give more room for individuals, for the misfits, you know, the people who have different approaches. As principal he was principal of St. Andrew's Secondary School. As principal, he had to do the things that a principal have to do, right? Punish boys, for instance, and I presume they still do it, but in those days certainly they still use the cane.
The cane, yeah.
And he would have to do it, though he didn't like it, and he had a ritual about it because his principal's office in St. Andrews in those days had 3 sets of doors, one to the corridor, one to the office, and one to the outside, you know, and no aircon in those days. He'd sit with all the doors are open. So if a boy came to him and needed to be caned, he would have to go through the ritual of closing all those doors.
Right. Oh.
And then cane or whatever it is. But he said there were times when he would use reverse psychology. Like a particularly naughty boy in his umpteenth visit to the office. So, you know, it could be a ruler on a hand or something. So my father would get out the instrument of torture, right?
Yeah.
And the boy would then hold out his hand, and instead of my father hitting it, put the cane or ruler in his hand and said, "Now you hit me."
Yeah. And
this shock to the boy was probably more effective than if he got a routine caning.
Yeah.
So that was what he tried to do sometimes.
Wow.
You know, I think he when he was fresh in Singapore, he started a sketching school. He got boys to do plays, to write plays, and to act them out.
There's something about the dramatic arts that lend to, I don't know what it is, expressing yourself. Maybe it's confidence building, or just, you know, there's something about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, he taught also as much as he could, and he would sometimes take the most difficult class, you know, like the no hope class, right, of the Sec 3, Sec 4, where teachers were given up. But he saw it not so much as a challenge, but he really wanted to find a way to get to them. And that's when he would work with them and get them to write, you know, to write essays or write plays, and in that he actually, and these are students that written off as lazy, stupid, and all that.
Right.
But in some of them, what he saw in their writing showed a deep intelligence, which was just no way to get out.
Yeah.
You know, a deep sensitivity and so on.
Right.
Yeah, and his heart was always with such people.
Right. And I guess also the fact that I think most of us don't see that, right? What he sees in them, we don't see, or don't even bother to learn, in a sense. Like, I'm going to share really quickly that I shared with you earlier that I taught at Northlight School, and not even many people know the difference. When I say Northlight to people, they think it's Pathlight, which is the special school. So, I mean, to me, that even just goes to show that, you know, not enough has been talked about Northlight. Northlight is you go there when you fail your PSLE, and there is a sense of, like, you know, these students are misfits, right? They don't fit into the normal scheme of, especially in Singapore, how progressive and how high-flying we are as a paper, you know, driven society. You're taken out of that system immediately, and you know, in some ways they have that chip on their shoulder. They label failures. And the way to communicate with them is completely different, I found, as a teacher, and rightfully so. I mean, he's found, you know, that way to communicate, that way in, and I found that I had to figure that out by talking to the teachers, but also I feel that there's not enough, perhaps educating me as an educator on how to deal with a different language almost would be very beneficial, and I find that is still in some ways lacking.
Yeah, I think we're beginning to recognize it more, but there's still a lot of work to be done in gearing up and being more creative in the way we connect with people, I think. You know.
For sure, yeah.
I mean, I think in some ways, I wouldn't say it's good, but it's perhaps necessary that the North Lights and so on are there. But the danger, as we've said, is that you end up with ghettoization, right? And that sense of, I'm not good enough for that mainstream, and so I'm here. So perhaps this is just one step into reintegrating these efforts.
Yeah.
But I'm not a teacher, so I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I wonder what, I mean, I wish I could have that conversation with him. I think he passed 5 months just after I was born. So same year, but yeah, just never got
1977.
Never got a chance to. Now you know my age. But have a read if you know. It's also available at the library. I think this might be out of print at the moment, although it got reprinted. Just
this was the reprint.
This is the reprint, right?
I think that's no longer being sold, but it's in the libraries. It should be in the libraries.
What touched me was, I mean, first of all, the excitement of like he, surviving through the war and him being on a ship that was torpedoed.
It was a prisoner of war.
Oh yeah, and then captured, and then that scene, that powerful, not a scene, it was a real thing that happened between just the two Japanese, the Japanese soldier and him, and how they were just equalized.
And exactly.
They're just
victims, pawns in this game.
Exactly, and how he was just able to see him, the other person, for just who he was. Really interesting read.
I think the other thing about this book, and this comes from friends who didn't know him, because they're a couple of friends who read the book, and one of them didn't say to me, said to another friend that, I want to marry this man.
Oh wow!
And that's because for a man of his generation, if he were alive today, he'd be 110, 109. For a man of his generation, in many ways he was a man of his generation, but he was pretty forward-looking, open-minded. But unusually for someone like him, he was ready to admit to his vulnerabilities, his flaws. It comes through.
It's here in this book. Yeah, he doesn't claim to be perfect in any way.
Absolutely. There's and which I think is very useful for people today. That nobody is perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wonderful. Let's see, have we covered everything now? I think we've talked about Aware, so the saga I'll put in the link in the video description. We talked about this book, we've talked about, so when is it coming out? Letter to My Father.
I'm not sure. Marshall Cavendish is doing it. I think perhaps third quarter, because the companion piece, Letter to My Mother, has just been released.
Okay, so we'll look out for that. In any case, do you have any social media that people can follow you on? Twitter, right?
Well, I am all, but I don't post very much. I'm a baby boomer, right? So I'm more on Facebook, and I share a lot and like a lot. And occasionally when I share something, I will say a few words, but and I'm hesitant to I can't be bothered to post very much, but I think it's because when I was a journalist, I did so much column writing. I don't right now feel a great need to comment on things.
Right.
There are enough people out there commenting. Let them go and slug it out,
Right. Well, this has been so meaningful. Thank you so much for coming here to chat and catch up.
I'm glad you're doing this sort of thing. I think a lot more people should be talking.
Yeah, I mean, not quite as exciting as Netflix, but this is meant to be heard more than actually seen. So long form. I hope I hope people are drawn to wanting to find out more detail rather than just skimming the surface. All right, thank you for coming on once again.
Thanks, Dwayne. Yeah.
We'll see you in the next season. Bye.